journalism at the University of Sheffield. I didn't intend necessarily to come into education. My friend taught the course before me and asked me to come and cover her maternity leave, and then she never came back. So I ended up staying for a while. So the ideas of journalism and education hadn't really, when I was in the industry, it hadn't really occurred to me to think about it in any level of depth. And then I came into the University of Sheffield, Russell Group University, and as I'm sure most of you will have experienced at some stage, you suddenly start to feel the tension and people pulling in different ways. Does journalism count as education? Does it, have a place in a university? Or, are we training courses that should be relegated to further education and sixth form colleges? And this was kind of an eye-opener to me, which I'd kind of worked my way around for quite a few years. But then the week that the call for papers for this conference came out was incredibly timely, because I'd been having discussions with colleagues. To give a bit of context, I've been having discussions with a colleague who was from a different department, and we were working on a collaborative project, and he turned around one day and said, well, really, I would never encourage any student to come and do journalism, because it's not a proper degree, is it? You're not really academic. There's, you don't uphold the educational standards we would expect in a Russell Group university.
What degree did that person teach?
It was languages. He went on, and the call for papers dropped in my inbox at the same time, and it was training versus education, and it made me feel a little bit testy, it's fair to say. I thought, right, I've had enough of this. I understand that to some people, vocational courses in a university setting is an unfortunate byproduct of the massification of higher education. I understand that some people think that, when successive governments open the doors and let more and more people come into universities, that the vocational courses and the rise in them, that was, and the employability that we're now dealing with all the time, that has somehow, set this rot in their higher education systems. And there are any number of educational theories that we could quote on this that line up to say how vocational teaching is not, true university teaching. So Hussey, there is room for applied and purely vocational training, which is of value to the student and country, but it should not be passed off as higher education. Oakeshott, a university is not a machine for achieving a particular purpose or producing a particular result. It is a manner of human activity. A student is not encouraged to confuse education with training for a profession or learning the tricks of the trade. And that's just two in a whole number, Gibbs, Molesworth, Sharuk, you could name educational theorists who hold the very same view. And then just 2 weeks ago, I received a desperate email from a student of mine who'd studied with us, and she's from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands government had paid for her tuition fees. They'd given her a grant, because they still get that over there, but they were trying to claw the money back. And she sent me an email to say that they contacted her and said that actually they wanted her to repay the money for the fees and the grant because, and I wrote it down to make sure I didn't get it wrong, they said they didn't recognise a degree in journalism studies from the University of Sheffield as a serious university level degree. Which made me feel even more grumpy about the whole thing. And this whole idea that, we're constantly having to defend ourselves, we're constantly having to, defend what we do. But when, you look at these big questions, for a start off, I wonder why training and vocation are such dirty words. It's not as if when we're training people that it's, you'd think, usually in the way that some people talk about it, that we're throwing small puppies under lorries and letting them be slammed, or torturing small children. We're not. We're preparing people for life. We're preparing people to go out there and to go into the world of work if they want to. We don't always prepare people, just for journalism. They go into a whole range of different things. A lot of them go into further education and studying and MAs or doctorates. So, why is it that training and vocation always come down to being seen as somehow, less than? Also, why does nobody ever give us credit for doing more than just the tricks of the trade? We're in newsrooms all the time, but journalism itself is quite robust and has things in it that you need to do all the time that require you to think. We don't walk into our newsrooms and say, right, we're going to produce this today and I don't want you to think about it at all. Just do it, just parrot, none of us in the room do that. And the sum of education isn't just what one person teaches in one room on one given day, in one news day or production week or whatever. It's everything they receive. And we don't all teach, just by ourselves. We have teams, people offering different things. But how do we persuade people that everyday journalism practice does include, sort of reflection and assessment and things that would be much more, in relation to education? I mean, as journalists, we're expected to be inquisitive and persistent. Inquisitive is just a nice word for nosy, but it will do, nosy, curious. We ask lots of questions because we have to. We always want to know why something has happened, not just what, who and how. We are analytical and critical. We initiate things, we're innovative, we're trying new ideas. We need to be able to produce coherent narratives. We need to be able to debate, argue, widen the discussion. We should aim to have work that has an impact, and we do need to understand wider things around us: history, law, ethics, politics, everything. I mean, in Sheffield, we're in a city that a colleague of mine likes to say has more ASBOs than bistros, and our students get to go out and play with that. We've had Rotherham on our doorstep, child abuse scandal. We've also had Hillsborough, being, debated endlessly. They're getting, we've got, from Nick Clegg, Miliband, we've got MPs on the doorstep who are moving and shaking. They're having to think about wider things all the time to produce their journalism. And any one of these things would equate to what is deemed more academic study as well. If you're going to go and study, they want you to reflect, they want you to be critical. It's not that we're poles apart. So I started to think about what makes a subject educational, and I'd been working in a couple of cross-discipline initiatives at the University of Sheffield, and yes, we looked at things that we kind of touched on yesterday: Cope's cycle of experiential learning, Shun, Fox and Lupton's theories of learning, all the kind of theory that I'm sure you've all come across at various times. But what do the people who do it, and not just me because I'm a journalist, I'm biased in favour of journalism, what do people who do it think makes education? So I ran a small scale focus group, and we had colleagues from medicine, architecture, mathematics, law, languages, and the International College. Somebody came from there, education and history. And in a room we sat down and tried to unpick what makes education education. And some of it is remarkably similar to what makes journalists journalists. They want a high level of criticism and debate, curiosity, imagination and courage, encouraging students to question, allowing students to make mistakes and learn from them. Self-assessment: students should be able to look at their own work and be able to identify its strengths and weaknesses. They should be given space to work things out for themselves, not be spoon-fed all the time. And also given opportunities for peer feedback, to be able to engage actively with standards and performance and take some control over their level of learning. So if that's all deemed to be, good practice for education, how do we map up? So Sheffield, we have BA and MA degree courses, and I will unashamedly admit that they are heavily practice focused. We, triple accredited, the BA now, double accredited. Got to get used to saying that. But we, we do have a heavy practical focus. It's one of the things that we love and that we do. But we don't just have the practical focus. We do have core academic modules. We have optional modules, and so we work as a team to provide a wider education. But what I'm more concerned is the idea that somehow people think that the practice, we come in and we say, oh, well, we're the practitioners, we learn by doing. The academics are the academics and they learn by thinking. In actual fact, when you're doing, you should be thinking too, if you're doing it well. And journalists who are working well, they should be reflecting, they should be assessing, they should be asking all these questions. Because if they're not good journalists. They should be doing it, on their day-to-day job. So it's more, I would say that instead of, separating the two, we should be absolutely trumpeting the fact that journalism is inherently educational and academic in what we do in our day-to-day lives. But I would say that because I'm a journalist and I teach journalism, and I think, so that's the case. So can we, expand it out? How can we think about whether or not we're really doing it? So I sent a survey out to our third years who've just finished. We finished a bit later than most universities, so they finished about a week and a half ago. And the last module they have in their entire degree that they hand in for is mine. So I have 2 weeks of them going, oh, it's so hard, I hate you. And then they hand in and suddenly they all love me because their degree's finished and it's all happy. So we had 89 students in our third year this year that has just finished. So I sent out the survey to them, and I wanted to wait until they'd finished so that they could, reflect on their entire degree and not when they're in the middle of it. And we got 42 respondents, which isn't huge, but given that half of them are in Magaluf or sleeping off their hangovers or, sort of getting to work with, trying to claw back some money, an awful lot of them have been preparing for seems like 3 weeks to get to Glastonbury this weekend. We have managed to get a reasonable response rate, nearly half of them to do it. So what I asked them was, before you started the course, how important was it to you that there was some academic rigour to the course as well as the practical? And 84% of them said it was important or very important. It was a driver for them that they thought that we were, we were moving, not just focusing solely on practical. Now that they've finished, did they feel the course was academically rigorous? And again, 84% said that they agreed or they strongly agreed. And then some comments that came through. I feel like the number of practical modules fully prepared me for the job I am now in. However, the selection of academic modules gave me a more dynamic and nuanced understanding of modern journalism and journalistic theory. One complements the other, resulting in a well-rounded and very rich journalistic education. Some of the things that the focus group pulled up, I started to quiz them on that. Did they think their degree had encouraged critical thinking? 90% agreed or strongly agreed. Neutrals, I don't know, maybe they're indecisive, they didn't know whether or not they've been encouraged to think critically. And again, I engaged in a lot of critical reading on topics I'd never looked into in depth before, such as election and war reporting. I learned crucial things such as how to be media literate when reading about politics, about the unconscious bias that mass media journalists can express, and the ways news coverage can conform to a set of norms. We questioned key knowledge we'd been taught at other points during our degree, such as the principle of objectivity. It would be worrying if students went out to work as journalists without ever thinking about these things and without being able to critically evaluate their own work as well as the work of others. And I promise I didn't pay them. It was all anonymous. I didn't give them wine, I didn't bribe them. These were just unsolicited comments. Did your degree encourage you to reflect and assess your work for strengths and weaknesses? 100% of them agreed or strongly agreed coming out in favour that it did, that they had felt that they'd been having to self-assess and learn, sort of take control of looking at what they were doing. Did they have opportunities for peer feedback? 79% of them agreed or strongly agreed that they had opportunities to have an active role in sort of talking about how they'd worked as a group. Did your degree encourage you to be an active independent learner? 95% of them said they agreed or strongly agreed that it had. Were you encouraged to question journalism as well as produce journalism? And again, 95% of them agreed that it had or strongly agreed that it had. The various academic modules very much encourage critical thinking of journalistic theory, but also political, philosophical and economic theory too. Having developed this sense of criticism in these modules, it gifts the practical modules with an extra dimension of thought, criticism and engagement. Again, no money exchanged hands. They did, sort of just comment this. And I asked them to pick 2 or 3 words that they thought would sum up their degree. Fire off the top of their heads the words that would sum up their degree. Now, I was expecting practical to be high. We are a practical focused degree. We have lots of, news days, magazine production, digital, all kinds of things that go into it. So predictably practical is there. But the other words they threw out were critical, academic, reflective, challenging, exciting, came up quite a lot, useful, informative. So all words that, sort of you could go into any, sort of degree, any of the more traditional non-vocationals and you would expect to see coming through. They didn't feel that they had somehow had a degree that was less academic than other people. So where do we take this from here? Obviously that's just my students and who knows. So the people who took part in the focus group from architecture and medicine, they've sent out a survey as well to their students so we can assess and see, do other departments have a difference, are there variations in what people see? Now they didn't have the deadline of having to have something to present today, and not being journalists, they have not got their surveys back to me yet, but hopefully we'll see that and we'll be able to compare. But to my colleagues in architecture, they would say that they've had similar tensions, that those people who've been out into industry and worked as architects come back in and there are tensions, with people who have always studied architecture. But they don't feel it perhaps quite as keenly as we do. And I think some of that is because universities don't know where to put us. Are we social sciences? Are we media? Are we humanities? Where do we fit in education? And because they don't know where to put us, that makes them think that somehow, therefore, we don't fit, which I would argue is not true at all. You know, for other vocational courses, professional qualifications are an absolute must. You can't practice without them. Again, we don't have that, so we don't have that kind of, you know, if you can practice, it might be difficult to get a job, but you could go out and be a journalist without the NCTJ. So we kind of lack that barrier that shows that, you know, sort of that kind of professional engagement in that way. And that can lead to variations in courses. You know, sort of some courses are, you know, dealing with this stuff every day, but maybe there are the odd courses that come through that perhaps don't engage quite as much as others. We've also got the fact that our reputation as journalists go before us. You know, we're down there underneath used car salesmen and estate agents at the bottom of the pile, and the only thing we can take hope from is the fact that at some stage a banker somewhere will do something worse and go down to the bottom and notch us up a few steps. So we have that. But despite all the big, you know, things that we've seen, you know, sort of the new Leveson was mentioned yesterday, the News of the World hacking scandal, all these, people forget that that was uncovered by journalists. You know, attacking, critically thinking, you know, looking at what journalists do. Not journalists in universities, journalists in the day job, you know, proving that we do this stuff all the time. You know, that we do hold ourselves. Obviously, there are some people out there who, you know, give us a bad name and justify, you know, it's a justified bad name. But there's an awful lot of people out there who are just out there doing good jobs. You know, I've worked for 2 national newspapers, and one of them, I whisper it, was the Daily Mail. And I don't think I've ever done anything that I would be ashamed of or telling a student to do. And I think that would be the same for an awful lot of journalists out there. So, in theory, sort of looking at all this, I wonder if we need to reshape the debate. That maybe when we come in and people say, you know, sort of, oh, you're practical, you're vocational, and we come in and we argue quite rightly that the best way of learning is to learn by doing. News days are going to, you know, sort of, a good number of news days are going to give us, you know, sort of the chance to give them that application, give them that sense of it. But by arguing, you know, sort of the, you know, sort of, yeah, we're learning by doing, we shouldn't forget that the doing is actually educational too. It's not just practical. They're thinking, they're evaluating, they're constantly, you know, sort of having to do things that would be, you know, sort of wanted in any academic course in any university. And it may surprise the educational bods to hear that we are critical. You know, Molesworth, since students are attracted to vocational AJE because it is believed to act as a route into certain careers, why would an institution put effort into criticising these industries? But we do it all the time. You know, if I'd have been in the newsrooms yesterday when the front pages come out, we'd have absolutely been talking about the way the media had represented the EU referendum. You know, if I was saying to Katie earlier, that if I could be in the newsroom tomorrow when the Daily Mail's front page comes out, we would absolutely be having discussions about the way that they had treated the whole thing, and I would absolutely be feeling like this and getting very angry and cross about it. So I think we should, you know, sort of start promoting what we do as journalists as being, you know, stop saying either or. And it's not just that journalism education is education because we've got the academic modules. It's great that we do, and it's great that they do that, but journalism itself has something inherently educational about it and academic about it, and I think we should just stand up and say so. So that's me on my soapbox. Done.
Thanks, Alex.